That's technically over the line, right? That's like this bit needs to be over that line. But we are, aren't we? I hope I don't fail just because I can't park the aircraft. Hello guys, how you going? Back here at Melbourne Airport. Just hopped off a flight from Sydney, just a Qantas 737, a quick hop down from Sydney to Melbourne today, because tomorrow I have quite a big aviation thing that I need to do. See, when you have an instrument rating, what they used to call a command instrument rating, every 12 months here in Australia you have to do basically another check ride just to make sure that you know what to do, you're familiar with the procedures, you can fly the approaches that you're rated for. And they call that an IPC, an Instrument Proficiency Check. So what I thought I would do was just share some of my tips with you for the way that I'm preparing for this test. Just some of the techniques that I use to get ready before an instrument proficiency check ride, but this can apply to any check ride that you might be doing as a pilot. Oh, and incidentally, the flight coming into Melbourne from Sydney was just fantastic. A little bit of turbulence on the way out of Sydney, but the afternoon sun's going down here in Melbourne, and that final approach from the north to the north-south runway here is just... Whatever flight you're getting ready for, let me share with you my tips for how I prepare for an aviation check ride. Starting with, what should you do the night before your test? The night before a test, there are only three things you need to do. You need to study, then you need to do some studying, and then study. Actually, I haven't ridden my skateboard for a couple of days, so I really just wanted to put that into the shot. But the point remains that study the night before, I feel, is really important. A lot of people think that you shouldn't cram necessarily before a test, but I don't think it's cramming. I just take a copy of whichever flight book I've been using for the theory for the flight test I'm doing, and I sit there the night before and ask myself mock questions in my head. So I think, what would the examiner be asking me? And I find the answers in here. Now, if you have your own flight simulator at home the night before, what I really recommend is fly the flight. Just pretend that you've got your examiner sitting next to you and you're going to talk yourself through every single step of the process. And remember, all the mistakes that you're going to make when you're doing it at home in your sim, you're hopefully not going to then make the same mistakes the next day in your actual flight test. And even if you don't have a sim, it doesn't matter. Just grab your map, all your flight planning stuff, and sit in a chair and chair fly the flight. It's surprising how many mistakes you can actually get out of the way just by simply chair flying the flight the night before you actually jump in a plane and do it for real. Actually, just out of curiosity, let's see if we can do a barrel roll in this 172. Just a tip, don't do a barrel roll in your actual flight test. That's my best advice. Then think to yourself, what other little things can I do which will just get me ahead of the game before the test tomorrow? And I always look at weather and flight planning. Check the weather for tomorrow in advance, and if you know there's a strong likelihood of things not going ahead, thunderstorms, big frontal activity, all that messy stuff, call your examiner. Be proactive and say, look, looking a bit iffy tomorrow, should we make a contingency plan just in case we don't go ahead? They'll love that stuff. It shows that you're looking ahead and it shows that you know what to look for. Make sure you have up-to-date maps, IFR flyers, make sure you've got up-to-date plates, and finally get your flight plan prepared. You can do so much before the day of the actual test. I know you don't know the winds and the speeds, but at least get the flight plan, the framework of it, into the system and saved. So all you need to do the next day is go in, drop in your speeds, do your fuel calcs, and it's far less that you have to do on the actual morning of the test.
Now, not only does it get your body in the right frame of mind, I mean, get those endorphins going, and just make sure you're nice and limbered up and ready for the big flight the next day. But also, I find, I don't know if you guys are the same, but when I run, I can actually fly flights in my head when I'm running. Now, you might be able to do the same when you're cycling, walking, whatever you're doing. But when I'm actually on a run, I can fly a flight from takeoff, I can do my 500 feet checks, pretty much work my way all the way around the flight. So when it comes to the day itself, I've kind of chair flown it or kind of running flown it, or you know what I mean? You've just been through it before in your head. Just, of course, just don't overdo it. That's a key thing. I mean, don't completely wear yourself out the night before. You're going to need your strength and your energy for the next day. But getting in some sort of exercise, maybe do kind of half of what you normally do the day before, I reckon is a really good way to get your mind and your body prepared for that big day. All right, but we're about halfway around Albert Park. We need to end up over there. So let's keep going. What a beautiful night.
When all your study's done, when your flight plan's in, when you know you've done everything you can before the big test tomorrow, just get a good night's sleep. Your mind's probably going to be racing, it's going to be full of thoughts, you'll be a bit nervous, but if you can try and get a good night's sleep the night before, it's just going to do you so many favours for the morning. Now, you might be nervous before your flight test, but on the day, have a good breakfast. The last thing you want to do is turn up with an empty stomach because your energy levels are going to be really low. And the worst thing is sitting in that cockpit with your stomach rumbling, which I've had happen to me before, your mind just gets distracted. So on the day of the flight test, make sure you eat well and plenty of fluids as well. Actually, next tip, drink plenty of fluids. In my flight bag, I always carry a flask of water as well. And I always make sure I have this full every time I turn up for a flight. My next tip is a really important one, and it is don't be late for your test. Give yourself plenty of time to get to the airport. Don't spend your morning watching Steve-O Knievo videos when you should actually be making your way to the airport. Which does remind me, we need to make our way to the airport. So today we are, first of all, banging the camera on the top of the cockpit. Today is the day for the Instrument Proficiency Check. So this is basically my 12-month review for flying IFR. Similar to if you fly VFR, you need to do that every 2 years, that biennial flight review, the BFR. Now you may notice something up here. In fact, you may notice a lack of something up here, and that's because there's no GoPros. I'm not actually going to film this flight, and I'm doing that for a couple of reasons. First of all, I'm flying with a different instructor today. It's not Mike, who I normally fly with. But because this is a testing flight, and because John's actually being an examiner here, and I'm being a student being examined, I don't want to put any unnecessary pressure on him, or even on me, just whilst those cameras are rolling, whilst the test is going on. Now, there are two main components to this flight test. There's the ground component, which will be a series of questions just asking me about some of the rules of instrument flying, the rights and privileges of holding an instrument rating, all that kind of thing, like the legalities of flying under the IFR, the instrument flight rules. And then the second part is going to be the actual flight test itself. So hopping here into Kilo Juliet November, we're going to do a couple of approaches, head out to Avalon, do the ILS, do some... Anyway, I've got to pre-flight this aircraft before we go. It's always a nice relief to actually get that handshake at the end and get that tick in the pass box, which means I'm current now for instrument flying for another year, which is great. All right, where should we go?